with a colleague who's offshore, and we talked about women's work. So I want to prepare this and share it because that's the whole point of doing my research is sharing the information and seeing the common bonds that we share as well as our differences. So here's a snapshot of one of the books I drafted after the LA Textile Show. I've been involved with the textile industry, fashion industry for many years, was an international trade specialist with the GATT trade negotiations that dealt with textile industries as well as others, automotive, steel, agriculture, etc. There have been a lot of changes, and this is a quick update because the speaker, I want to give her credit for the beautiful work that she does. She did a presentation on patchwork that you can see on this screen, and she's hard at work at her desk. And we mentioned how she was raised, that women were expected to do this type of sewing. And that struck a chord. We had a long chat during the discussion. And I want to just present this information because this goes back to a long history of African American women. This is part of the 400 Souls presentation by Ibram X. Kendi, Keisha Blaine, specifically Black Women's Labor by Brenda. Saved or free was immediate. Let's start Enslavers passed from the top. Pressure of having to provide the taxes assessed for their Black bonded women directly onto these women. The legal designation of Black women as fundamentally different in body and character from other women in colonial society directly influenced African women's workloads and the punishments they endured if they could not meet these expectations. These enhanced labor assignments, in turn, damage women's health, prenatal care, and the amount of attention that they could give their dependent kin. Single, free Black women struggled to make their own tax payments, a financial obligation that contributed to the likelihood of their impoverishment and dependency. They also suffered the consequences of being viewed as less desirable spouses in the eyes of other free Blacks who were reluctant to take on their additional financial responsibilities. This othering of Black women in colonial American society was foundational in the assault on Black femininity, masculinity, the Black family, and the socio-cultural roles of Black adults. From this initial effort, and from many more that were rapidly legalized or customarily practiced in the 17th century, an image of Black womanhood emerged that adhered to female gender prescriptions neither of Africans nor of Europeans. It was a womanhood synonymous with market productivity, not motherhood. With physical prowess instead of feminine vulnerability, and with promiscuity rather than modesty or a heightened moral sensibility. Such a distortion of Black women's physical, emotional, cultural, gendered, and spiritual selves led to the broad public's imagining of Black women as workhorses, whores, and emasculating matriarchs. Today, this historical misrepresentation remains a common justification for the theft of our children, our physical, medical, political, and sexual exploitation, and our broad criminalization. The timing of this 1643 legislation was neither accidental nor incidental. It occurred once it was clear that the colony would survive and could turn a profit with sufficient labor resources. By the third decade of British residence, African female workers were a part of the formula for colonial settler success. The fledgling British mainland colony's 1620 census counted 15 such female workers that year, all thought to have arrived on the White Lion and the Treasurer in 1619. While more than a few perished in the Anglo-Powhatan War of 1622 or other military hostilities, as well as from disease, exposure,
malnutrition, random acts of violence,
And childbirth.
poor medical attention, and accidents. The cargoes of bound black female workers continue to arrive. Although no population enumerations have been recovered for 1640, 10 years later, Virginia was home to 300 Africans, many female laborers among them. The skills that the first arrivals brought with them prepared them to be productive farmers and livestock keepers. Many who arrived from Angola, for example, like many of the earliest captives in British North America, were skilled farmers. In their home communities, they had cultivated a variety of crops, some for many generations. The crops included various types of corn and grains, such as millet and sorghum, as well as bananas, plantains, beans, peanuts, pineapples, rice, pepper, yams, sweet potatoes, sugarcane, palm oil, and citrus fruits. They were accustomed to clearing land by using slash and burn methods, and they used hoes to prepare soil and to remove weeds. They practiced crop rotation. Many also had raised, butchered, traded, and prepared for the table cattle, goats, chickens, sheep, pigs, and other livestock. Labor in their West Central African homes was gender distinct, unlike their experiences in early 17th century Virginia and other British settler colonies. Among farming peoples, men cleared the brush and cultivated tree crops such as those that produce palm oil and wine, and from which they made medicines and sculpted. Women planted, weeded, and harvested other crops. Men were responsible for building houses, making cloth, sculpting, working iron, and long-distance trading and hunting. Women cooked, cared for their children, and performed other domestic tasks. Women in seaside communities also dived for marketable seashells and boiled salt water in order to produce salt, another highly sought-after market item. It did not take long before their skills as livestock keepers, domestics, and especially agriculturalists were recognized, prompting one mid-17th century Virginia governor to note that the planting of crops would occur on the advice of our Negroes. Settlers, however, demanded that black women perform the same tasks as black men. These women, like black and white indentured men, had to clear their owners' heavily wooded frontier lands, carry wood, and help construct dwellings, outhouses, and fences. Archaeological records from the 17th century Chesapeake, for example, document the kinds of upper skeletal damage that young black women sustained, probably by carrying heavy loads of wood on their heads or shoulders. They routinely planted, nurtured, weeded, and harvested corn and other plants, in addition to caring for tobacco, the most important cash crop of the era, and a very labor-intensive one. As early as 5 years after the first known captive arrivals, one planter could boast that his black and white laborers produced a tobacco crop valued at 10,000 English pounds. When not working outside under the supervision of men, African women worked for their mistresses. Their assigned domestic tasks included barnyard labor, tending to livestock, cooking, butchering, salting and preserving meat, making soap and candles, house cleaning, laundry, sewing, carding, spinning, weaving, bathing, dressing and dressing the hair of their mistresses, and caring for children, their owners, and their own. Many also had to perform sexual labor. Between 1639 and 1644, work defined Black women's lives, and the law of 1643 codified their differentiation from other women. This law led to a host of inhumane, defeminizing consequences for African and African-descended women. The endorsement by British North America's first permanent colonies, two essential bodies of influence, the General Assembly and the Church of England, proved unshakable.
1644 to 1649. Anthony Johnson.
So I'll cut here. That was the early history, 17th century here in America, of what is called Black women's labor and what were the definitions, including the fact that Black women were taxed at a substantial rate. There was unfree labor, and the duties were given to Black women that were similar to the males in many cases, the agricultural work plus the work in the house, which also is connected to my podcast episode that I want to just share briefly. An episode, you can find the entire text on my podcast series, Second Win, but I think it begs a few minutes just to listen to the origins of this
Night
ghost
has
tale.
fallen, and the moon is a glowing golden orb in the black sky. See how it shines on the dark back roads of America, and on one road in particular. Come with us, and we'll take a walk down the moonlit road, for the night is waiting, and the moon is full.
The Moonlit Road presents Episode 50, The Slave Girl, written by Craig Dominy and told by Veronica Bird.
When folks think about the American South, one image that always comes to mind is the old plantation house. Before the Civil War devastated the South, the plantation homes were about the closest thing America had to magical European palaces. But what some folks don't know, or maybe don't care to think about, is that many of these plantations were built on the backs of slaves. These slaves toiled under the whip of the white plantation owners, harvesting cotton and sugarcane for days, weeks, months, and years on end. Some were literally worked to death, only to be replaced like an old shoe when the next boatload of captured slaves came into port. So while the plantations may have been wealthy palaces to some, they were places of misery and death for many others. So it should come as no surprise that many of the plantation homes remaining in the South are rumored to be haunted. This is the story of one of those houses.
I'll cut here. You
Back
can
in the 1800s,
hear the rest
many plantations were located
on my podcast series under honoring Women's History Month, our History Month, The Slave Girl of Myrtle's Plantation, a Louisiana ghost story. So for now, I'll cut. We had the discussion. We talked about sewing, patchwork, quilting, and the other things, crocheting. And I mentioned to the speaker that, yes, I was raised to do all of those things. And I saw my grandmothers, my aunties, the women in the family did that automatically. So this is not only a presentation to honor our work, our hard work, but our connections. The speaker was Mrs. Huffington in San Andres, Colombia, and the connection was very interesting because it's an island that has a history of connections with Africans. There was privateering, piracy, as well as indigenous people. So there is a mixture. And she mentioned there's a mixture, and I'm living with a mixture as well. But I do want to honor the hard work of the women folk. Everyone in my family worked hard from dusk to dawn. So I'm including a picture of my mother, young mother,